Welcome to Italian Innovators. I'm Luca Cottini, and today I'm in the company of Alberto Milani, entrepreneur and creator of the jewelry and lifestyle luxury brand Alberto Milani, a love affair with Italy, president of the Italy America Chamber of Commerce of New York, coordinator of all chambers of commerce in the NAFTA area, and co-founder of Piazza Italia Market in New York City. Alberto Milani supports Italian jewelry companies to define their mission and position themselves in the US market, and he is recognized in the industry as an inspirational speaker and a visionary leader. So thank you very much, Alberto, for accepting my invitation to be in the show.
Pleasure, Luca. Thank you for having me.
So today we'll explore Italian jewelry as a culture, a lifestyle, and a business. We'll examine how the Italian tradition of craft impacts the design of new objects and Italy's position in the global market. Given your role as ambassador for Italian businesses, we'll also discuss the key functions of the Italian Chamber of Commerce in New York and the most recent project of Piazza Italia. And I want to start from your story. You studied business and law in Milan, and then started your entrepreneurial career holding executive roles at Procter & Gamble, Sector Sport Watches, Bulgari, and Buccellati. How did you discover or build your path? What did you learn along the way?
As you underlined, my first debut in the work life was at Procter & Gamble. So at the time, the luxury market, let's say in the beginning of the 90s, were not using properly marketing, were not using properly branding, and there was a lot of interest coming from few luxury company in trying to attract as much as they could young talents from American Express, from Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and so forth and so on, because there was somehow few elements that at the time were not properly managed or properly developed in the luxury business, including jewelry. And I was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time. And there was a bunch of people that Bulgari hired worldwide to start a different kind of approach. It was very far away from a traditional way of doing business, especially in jewelry, which is, as you said in the beginning, extremely traditional, and the approach extremely closed within a family or within few families tradition, and not so much open to the innovation, to something that was not done in the same way from previous generation. And it was a brave approach from Bulgari, but it paid back for them, for sure, but also for myself and for the other people that were with me in that time.
This is really interesting because you introduce an element of innovation in a field that has to do with eternity. A jewel is by itself something that is forever. And there is a word in Greek which I really like. It's the word cosmos, which means ornament, from which are modern cosmetic, and universe, from which are modern cosmic. So a jewel is a cosmos, as both an ornament and a piece that contains a word, as both a trendy item and a timeless piece of art. This is also the success recipe of Bulgari that you mentioned, which also positioned itself at the intersection of the trendy walkway Via dei Condotti in Rome and the eternity of the Spanish Steps. So what is a jewel for you, and what cosmos or world does it represent?
When you mentioned Bulgari and you mentioned the traditional Bulgari related to Spanish Steps and Rome and Via Condotti, as a matter of fact, one of the first tagline that we used in my time in Bulgari was to add to the Bulgari name, which, by the way, was very difficult to read properly because you may remember the U of Bulgari is with a Roman type, so it's a V. That is obviously a tradition. It is coming from a Greek heritage of Bulgari, because Sotirio Bulgari, as a matter of fact, came from Greek tradition. So we had something was a breakthrough, was a contemporary Italian jewelry, which like now it seems very simple to say, but it wasn't simple at all, because somehow you're prisoner of those three words. You are prisoner of Italian, prisoner of contemporary, and jewelry, of course. So it means that you have to be within that kind of promise that you're making on your audience, to be all the time on a contemporary point of view, presenting something that is meaningful to the current generation, which is a bit of a challenge in jewelry. So in one sense, you rely on tradition. Very rarely you create something that was not been done already in jewelry or very similar to. But on the other side, there is always a touch of modernity that is important, and how to be relevant is the challenge. And if you want to make it even more difficult, you're working with very precious materials. On fashion, for instance, you can try a few things. You can add to a new designer or any collection, any year could be a different approach. But at the end, the cost of material is very limited. In our case, you have a challenge, which is a technical one, of trying to use your material wisely, because otherwise it will most likely cost you too much. On the other side, you want to maintain a designer approach and be relevant to the current audience. I have a lot of respect for whoever is designing and producing jewelry, because there is always some sort of a final fight between whoever is designing, whoever is producing, because they are following different kind of restriction and limitation. But then at the end, as a magical touch, something will become a good interpretation of both. Perfect execution when it comes to traditional interpretation, and also physically something that, as a matter of fact, could be produced. Even better if it could be produced and scale up from production point of view and not being one of a kind. That is an interesting challenge, which probably is the beauty of the jewelry itself as a segment. Is very unique compared to anybody else.
And definitely resources are not limitless. So this is a resource for creativity in the sense that you really have to use them wisely. The fact that they are limited imposes a deeper attention and a deeper care. Now, your brand's motto is a love affair with Italy. So what makes a jewel Italian, and how does the Italian jewelry tradition or Italy's obsession with beauty impact or translate into the design of new and timeless objects?
So when you talk about made in Italy, usually the common way to view made in Italy most of the time drives you to beauty, to the dolce vita, to the lifestyle, but also to vacation time, pleasant time, food, wine, beautiful scenarios. This is basically the common way to have your own interpretation of what made in Italy is. And then maybe something comes to your mind right away, maybe a beautiful car, a beautiful hotel, fashion, but also jewelry as well. And at the end, if you try to sum up what made in Italy is, you go home with something that could be a three-prongs approach. The first one is related to the beauty of what we're doing. Sense of beauty in Italian, la grande bellezza. This is basically what we know how to translate and come up with the right interpretation of the beauty. And because we were blessed, we were born and raised in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And if you born and raised in Florence, compared to being born and raised in an industrial city in East Europe, most likely the sense of beauty that you were able to cultivate as a kid is definitely stronger. And we have that as a culture, as part of our identity as Italians. So we are able to transfer that, even when we don't think about it, goes through. And this is the first one. The second one is the made in Italy is a combination of universal values that most of the time are commonly shared in different culture, different religion. I just give you a couple of examples. So family is very strong for the Italian culture. Kids and love for kids is definitely one of the value that we have strong in our own culture. Food or interpretation of good food and spending time enjoying that part of life. Well, it is not for everybody, but it could be commonly accepted horizontally in different culture and could be appreciated as well. So I would say that when you think about it as a marketing approach to an audience, that rather than being an Italian audience is what you can call italic or Italic audience, you jump into a situation that you're talking to somebody who maybe is not born and raised in Italy, like the two of us, but has a very strong love for those values. A typical example is a Japanese client who understands the different kind of sophistication of Tuscan wine and is willing and able to spend a certain amount of money to acquire the best bottle of Brunello or wherever they feel like. This is a client who is not Italian, but is accepting that kind of values, and those are is a large audience. I think that you can find that one of the largest audience in marketing. And the third one is the sophistication of what we're doing, the good taste, and this is something that everybody recognizes to us. Let's say buon gusto in Italian. This is something that every woman walking into a room with an Italian dress from Valentino, from Armani, or from something that is very famous worldwide, definitely feels very confident in walking into a room, and people are looking at it, whether or not they like it or not, but they recognize a certain kind of style of sophistication. So those 3 points are giving you the made in Italy strength, which is definitely way much stronger than any of an individual brand. So that is the reason why we call it the tagline in our case is a love affair with Italy, because it's embracing those 3 values and being able to come out the best interpretation of it.
And definitely, as we mentioned, like a piece of jewelry is both a piece of design and craft, or style and execution, but also a piece that contains a word, as you described. These three notions that are associated with the word of what we call made in Italy. Now, with regard to your line, I want to ask you, how is a jewelry line born at Alberto Milani, and what makes your brand distinctive and recognizable? And more broadly, how is Italian jewelry positioned in the global market?
Italian jewelry is at the end recognized as the innovation in terms of style and design. So Alberto Milani line is always created with, in my mind, a strong connection with a relevant audience. The relevant audience could change, could become younger, could become less formal, like it is nowadays. Therefore, when at the end of the process, when I have to sign up for the final design and the final production, I want to make sure that it is it could be broadly accepted as catchy, as snappy, as peppy as well. Something that you could go home with. You could think about yourself wearing it multiple times in different occasions. So this is obviously an easy interpretation, but I'm sure that it doesn't take a few days to make it happen. But then not only you will be constantly and frequently complimented by the jewelry you're wearing, but also you will feel at ease and updated at any given time, even if few years are passing by and you're wearing that kind of jewelry with pleasure and pride. So this is basically the ideal situation.
And this is also something that creates an object that means something, that people notice, that creates a vibe, and it also has a meaning that lasts over time. This is really fascinating about jewels and jewelry as a sector. Now, I want to ask you something about your position as president of really a historic institution in New York City, the first America-Italy Chamber of Commerce, which was established in 1887, so pretty early on in the game. Can you tell us about this story? Can you tell us about a little bit the work that you do for supporting Italian businesses that are entering in the American market? And maybe we can discuss this later in the next few minutes also in Italian, but I want to hear this story first.
As you said, 1887 is definitely quite impressive. I don't know if it's the oldest chamber of commerce worldwide, but it's one of the oldest worldwide. And the interesting part of the story that it was founded and created by a group of olive oil importers from New York went to Washington, D.C. to discuss about the increase of duties and custom problems, like as we're having right nowadays. So that basically was the beginning of the Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is differently from any other, I should say, Italian institution in New York, is the only, or I would say, the entity that is always very attached to the territory. Has been here for centuries. He knows very well what he worked and what he didn't. He knows very well memberships. And so anytime there is an Italian company who wants to be part of or trying to start business in the United States, the chamber is there for you to make sure that you avoid initial mistakes in one sense. On the other, is trying to help you as much as you can to become successful and to stay successful and to remain in the United States. So you can leverage a huge experience, a huge credibility of the membership, and also the best of the best that is part of our membership is at your services. So I guess that this is something that will help you very well and in your initial stage in this country, and probably, as you mentioned before, will help you to avoid common mistakes that are usually being made by Italian company coming through.
So credibility and insight. In connection with the Chamber of Commerce, you launched in New York City the project of Piazza Italia. What is it and how is it different from what you just described?
Piazza Italia is, once again, being on marketing for majority of my life, the tagline in that case is stronger together. So we believe that any medium or small Italian company could be definitely stronger in the initial phase, presenting itself under the umbrella of Piazza Italia. So Piazza Italia has 3 prongs on the approach. First one is a co-working space. So it's giving you the possibility of having your house, your offices in your city, but differently from a common co-working space, you live the community. The community is Italian, and most likely you share the same kind of experience or the same kind of challenges that somebody next to you is experiencing. So there is definitely a sense of Italian belonging that is definitely helping everybody. This is the first one. So you have your own office rather than signing up a lease agreement for 5 years and with letter of credit and a strong commitment from the parent company in Italy. You sign a membership, you have your own space for 1 year, and then after that you decide whether or not you like to stay. The second part are the services that we provide to the company. Only if you want to, and if you don't have anybody helping you, we can give you some strong support on marketing, on social media, on sales representation, logistic, which is something that is becoming a bit more complicated nowadays, and it will be more complicated going forward. And the third one are events that Piazza Italia is organizing. Those are events that will present the Italian community and, of course, the membership as a B2B approach, or sometimes also as a B2C approach, leveraging also a location which is very prestigious in the center of Manhattan on Madison Avenue and 44th. And part of our building is also the iconic former Brooks Brothers building in New York that we could leverage for major events. So we had the last one in the month of May, where we brought about 45 companies from Italy, and we got about 500 buyers coming through in 3 days. So if you sum up what we're saying on the beginning of your interview, so we all believe that Made in Italy is definitely stronger than yourself as an individual company, but also will help to attract a broader audience where within that kind of exhibition or events or community, you shine with your own talent, your own interpretation of Made in Italy, and is like a curated offer that is giving you different kind of level of integration with innovation and tradition and design, and is working very well.
Thank you. And I want to take this occasion to deepen our conversation in Italian for all those entrepreneurs and designers who are thinking about entering the American market. Volevo chiedere anche a livello di coaching, proprio di capacità di far entrare un'industria, un business dentro il mercato americano, quali sono le difficoltà e cosa ti sentiresti di dire a un'azienda che sta iniziando un percorso nel mercato americano?
Primo ostacolo, che è un ostacolo tradizionale, è sempre stato negli anni, che da quando sono entrato io in questo mercato 30 anni fa, la soglia di ingresso è molto costosa, molto più costosa di qualsiasi altro mercato, o anche molto più costosa di quanto di solito un'azienda italiana è disposta ad affrontare. Questo non vuol dire che sia impossibile, ma negli anni è stato il problema numero uno. Con l'avvento della parte digitale del business, questa barriera è sicuramente superata e oggi c'è la possibilità di presentarsi con formule nuove, come può essere quella di Piazza Italia, condividendo le spese fisse in maniera più interessante per tutti e soprattutto più economica, ma anche la possibilità di presentare attraverso il mondo digitale e attraverso i social media il prodotto in maniera moderna e diversa. Questo oggi, se vuoi, la tecnologia da una parte ti ha aiutato, dall'altra ti condanna a una vera chiarezza degli intenti e della proposta del business, perché specialmente sugli italiani che sono abituati insomma a esprimere la creatività in varie forme, a vari livelli, anche nel offrire il proprio prodotto, la propria azienda, la tecnologia ti imprigiona in alcuni segmenti e in alcuni algoritmi che richiede un'offerta molto calcolata, molto precisa. Anche parte del tuo lavoro, hai menzionato il coaching, è sicuramente importante sul linguaggio usato, sui termini, sulle keywords, sui colori. E questo diventa sicuramente oggi più che necessario quasi la cosa più importante su cui focalizzarsi, perché la rilevanza dell'offerta decide poi il probabile futuro oppure il probabile insuccesso nell'offerta. Quindi questo sicuramente è un passaggio molto più complicato. Da una parte costa meno, dall'altra è molto più sofisticato. E poi c'è l'ultimo che ho toccato brevemente prima, che è quello della logistica, quello che la pandemia ha cambiato, direi per sempre, e su questo non sono sicuro che le aziende italiane lo abbiano ancora compreso in maniera completa, che la logistica sia delle persone che delle merci sia cambiata per sempre. Quindi oggi la necessità di una geolocalizzazione, ma una presenza regionale, direi, sul territorio, mentre prima poteva essere una possibilità, oggi anche in questo caso è quasi obbligatoria. Oggi, proprio prima di questa telefonata, parlavo con un'azienda di materiali relativi all'agricoltura in Italia, che mi ha detto che erano alla ricerca di una base logistica negli Stati Uniti, perché hanno rischiato più volte di perdere gli ordini perché i tempi di consegna del prodotto erano completamente diversi al passato e non si riusciva più a gestire dall'Italia. Ecco, questo io credo che sia una lezione da abbracciare. Noi siamo abituati un po', come sai da italiano, Luca, a cercare di farsi le cose sempre da soli, e oggi è un modello che sicuramente fa più fatica rispetto al passato.
Grazie. Sicuramente la competizione anche negli Stati Uniti è estremamente più forte e dentro questo contesto come si fa a emergere o a creare un'influenza italiana che sia radicata? Nella mia esperienza vedo che dire "Made in Italy" non basta, può essere un'etichetta, bisogna saper articolare, come hai fatto bene prima, che cosa si intenda per Made in Italy, quindi bisogna saper articolare un discorso, una influenza.
Questo è ancora, se vuoi, più difficile perché parte dei tuoi studenti o parte delle tue connessioni giornaliere ti portano a capire le nuove generazioni, che ovviamente hanno dei tempi tecnici diversi dai nostri, hanno una velocità di linguaggio, di interpretazione e di attenzione diversa. Quindi è importante nel calderone che noi definiamo molte volte Made in Italy trovare i fattori rilevanti. Poi questi fattori rilevanti devono essere consegnati e gestiti in maniera moderna. Quindi da una parte c'è sempre la visione dell'artigianalità, della tradizione, ma molte volte questa artigianalità, questa tradizione non si è poi evoluta in progetti scalabili, e in questo caso gli Stati Uniti ti penalizzano, perché da una parte sei incuriosito e affascinato dal primo passaggio, ma quando poi il secondo passaggio non è in grado di fare marketing in maniera corretta, fare social media in maniera corretta, gestire customer service in maniera corretta, ecco che poi arrivi alla situazione che ti dicevo prima dell'azienda del campo agricolo che poteva avere questi tipi di problemi. Quindi in realtà vedi che non è neanche poi necessariamente relativo al design, alla qualità, alla tradizione, è che questi valori, seppure eccezionali, devono essere sempre al passo con i tempi, ma devono essere anche poi offerti e gestiti nella maniera adeguata rispetto a quello che il mercato chiede e i tempi del mercato chieda. Quindi molte volte non vuol dire che tu non stai facendo un buon prodotto o un prodotto adeguato o hai sbagliato qualche cosa, significa che non sei rilevante abbastanza per un numero di persone che possono essere rilevanti in termini di business. Quindi la distribuzione americana ti rifiuta non perché tu non sia valido, ma ti rifiuta perché non sei rilevante nello schema del business. Quindi tu dall'altra parte potresti essere magari stracontento di avere venduto $100.000, $200.000 all'anno, dall'altra però non sei importante per un'audience economica degli Stati Uniti, e quindi alla fine vieni, non ti dico abbandonato, ma vieni comunque sempre relegato in posizione di meno importante. Mentre invece poi ti accorgi, esempi, no, fulgidi della moda, direi il primo Armani, che non solo ha portato dei concetti diversi in innovazione, ma è stato bravo, anzi bravissimo, a portarlo in maniera scalabile e a diventare un'azienda come oggi multinazionale. Grazie anche, devo dirti, al mercato americano sicuramente.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to what you were saying in English. So the ability that you were describing to connect creativity, which we normally associate to artisanship, the craft that Italians are really masters at, with sustainable thinking, scalable businesses, and really strategic thinking. The ability to create products that speak, that mean something, but are also able to enter healthily within this market. So this is really the key for successful Italian stories of made in Italy that made it here in the US, where the ability to create and innovate was combined with the ability to think strategically and shape an influence, shape a story, shape an aura around these products. And I'm speaking like you were doing about fashion or design in particular, where products are able to connect with people's wants and needs and dreams. Certainly, jewelry is one of these categories. Thank you very much for this truly enlightening conversation. Now we examine the dynamic interrelation of culture and business in the jewelry sector and explore how an Italian brand can successfully create an influence in the American market, staying true to its core identity, but also developing new original pathways. Thank you, Alberto, for your time, your work, and all your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Luca.
And thanks everybody for watching. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe to this channel or the newsletter on the webpage of the show at www.italianinnovators.com to receive notifications of new episodes and know more about this project. You can also follow me on my LinkedIn profile or on Instagram at Italian Innovators for updates, news, and additional materials. Thanks again for your support. Arrivederci e alla prossima.